Hello? Says it's in excellent condition. Yeah, at some point I will definitely have it set up. Well, but for now we're just gonna be here talking about. Oh, let me see here. Hold on. Let me. Actually, don't want to see this. I don't need to know. Oh, I guess it's up. Who cares? So yes. Jesus. Here we're just talking about a little bit about geopolitics. Hey everybody, it's Nightingale here, starting the live stream. There isn't going to be much that we're talking about tonight, just a little bit. This will probably only last maybe an hour or two at most. Sorry, I'm a little sick, so I apologize for any of my coughing or anything that starts or begins. I know you only have a black screen now. Really wish I could figure out how to install something else into that, but we're figuring this out as we go, so we're okay. Today we're just talking about Russia. I think we're, of course, the war in Ukraine, what's going on with the Ukrainians right now, and, well, important stuff, as you know. Just wanted to go over a little bit of stuff for you. It's not really an official update on the war. I'm sure people have already know most of what's going on. I just wanted to make a claim, well, a general statement. The United States used to be really, really afraid of the Soviet Union. I mean, like, think about it. It was worried about the spread of communism across the world. And there's almost a weird sense of emotion that you get from that. There's this kind of inspiration that you get. I can feel it, where it just, you could see on the horizon the Red Army marching over the curve or curvature of the earth across the Siberian steppe, that they're spreading communism to the rest of the world, and that they're unstoppable, right? That was kind of like America's fear back in the 50s and 60s, most especially. And that fear, I would actually argue, is the direct reason why the American empire exists at all. Because I don't think that people understand just how unintentional empire building is. It's not something that really most people are actually successful in when they go out and they try to build one. Building an empire is it's not just like, oh yeah, this is just a Tuesday. Anybody who tries to push out, I mean, and make an empire, most of them fail. I mean, think about it, right? most people, they're not successful. I mean, how many times and the people who are, right? The people who are successful, we actually remember, right? We actually remember them. So, and the general question is, can Russia build an empire? You know, I would say probably not. But that's not just me just saying that just because, right? People are like, oh well, they're struggling with Ukraine. We didn't expect them to struggle. We expect them to, steamroll them. We thought the Russian bear was huge and scary and mean, and that we were all gonna be, dead. But I would actually argue that at least in the case of the Russians, right, that it's not that easy to build an empire. Building an empire is really, really difficult, right? And it's most of the time, it's not done on purpose. The British didn't go out of their way. They didn't wake up tomorrow and say, today I'm going to build an empire and I'm going to exploit everybody. No, it was actually chance, circumstance, and a little bit of luck is the reason they built one. I mean, think about it, right? It's not... Most empire building takes hundreds of years to do. The Russians themselves took hundreds of years to reach where they were, which all started after the collapse of the Mongols. Well, the Golden Horde specifically, but the Mongols by proxy. And it took hundreds of years until the famed Russian Empire of the 1800s, kind of the fear of most of the Western countries, just because of how enormous it was and how many people it had. Even if it was arguably a backwards country at that time, it was always developed, but developed in the, we're kind of, laterally developed compared to Western Europe. We repeatedly get into wars with them, we import their technology, and then we defeat the Central Asians using it, using the tech that they use on us. But think about the United States. America didn't build an empire on purpose. I can already hear some people are like, what are you talking about? Yes, some people, most of the time when empires are built, they're on accident. And in America's case, it's no different. So you almost look at the Russians saying, well, this is kind of your fault. You're afraid. You are so afraid. You're afraid now. And you're talking about, oh, well, it's your fault. You pushed into Western or Eastern Europe, and you pushed to NATO, and you're pushing against our borders of influence, and we can't accept this anymore. We would be indefensible with you being so close. But you have to remember, the fear of communism is exactly what built the American empire. Because in the 50s and 60s, the Americans really didn't have one. Nor were they trying to build one. There wasn't this, oh yeah, we're going to make an empire tomorrow. Yeah, there was the decolonization, and the United States forcibly decolonized, the European countries, and says you can't have colonies anymore. Makes us look really bad when the Soviets call us imperialists. And if you don't, you won't get money to rebuild because, obviously it was a war-torn, destroyed place. But the Europeans, they didn't have to, by the time they got up, and built themselves, they didn't have to stay within, the United States' nuclear umbrella. Some of them created their own nukes, obviously, in the case of France and Britain. But a lot of people pretend oh, well, the Americans started to build an empire and that's what scared the Soviets. No, the Soviets wanted to spread communism, and they even had, until, the nuclear bomb was detonated, they even had a plan of invading Western Europe to just keep going to destroy the Allies, right? To oust them. And they probably could have done it because their numbers still, even after the blood they shed on the way over, their numbers were still far above the Western powers. So it was that fear, and a reasonable one at that drove the United States to say, well, I need to build NATO, I need to build this, I need to build, and it wasn't, think about it. In the case of Japan, for example, Japan didn't think, oh yeah, I lost a war, let me just be pacifist, right? That's probably part of the reason. But, the United States was like, well, Soviet Union is close by. Communist China is on the rise, obviously, because it's the 50s when Communist China successfully won the Civil War. They're all communists, so let me build something in East Asia, some sort of angle to contain this communism, over there so that it doesn't spread across the world and we lose allies, because that's essentially what would happen. How dare you, you bloody, disgusting imperialists, to the United States. And Japan was became pacifist and was a willing participant. Yes, how's your bases? How's your troops? It's fine. Right? That the United States built its empire, right? Because that's how the American empire was built, right? Japan, arguably a part of the US empire. Japan let the US put bases there because the US was afraid of the Soviet Union. It's the same thing with Europe. So really, when Russia's saying, oh, you pushed into this and you have an empire and all this other stuff, I would look at you and I would say, you started this. Now, to be fair, it's 100 years ago now, but you pushed into Europe. You pressured Europe into the American orbit. And the Americans built their empire because think about it, before then, there wasn't really an American empire that existed. Yeah, there was some, we held the Philippines, but we didn't really want the Philippines. Yeah, we had the Panama Canal, even though we made a deal for the Panama Canal, right? We made a deal with the Panamanians to have some small strip of at the time, useless land in exchange for helping their war with independence. And they had those, but the Americans really didn't have some global spanning empire that you could now arguably say they have. Influence in almost every single continent across the world. You know, countries that are arguably, you know, smaller countries or vassalages of the American empire, which makes Europe really uncomfortable to say, but the reality is the Americans can really demand whatever they want out of Europe, as Europe is more still economically dependent on the United States and the trade guarantees the U.S. has that it still upholds. The Bretton Woods system is still technically in effect. But it wasn't the United States who said, oh yeah, I'm going to build an empire, and then built one. No, America said, I'm afraid of that guy. Let me do this. Let me do a little bit of this. Let me do everything in my power. And that became kind of the mission. So the United States pushed into, well, not pushed, but placed itself, maybe pushed in some regions, itself into issues around the world, like into places of influence in order to contain communism in the Soviet Union, which was you, Russia, you at the time. So really, you complaining that America's, you know, pushing further into West or Eastern Europe is kind of funny, because the American empire wouldn't exist at all if the Soviet Union didn't exist. If you didn't pressure or have the desire to invade the rest of Europe like Stalin's plan involved. Now you could say, oh, that was Stalin and not us, but that's like saying, oh, well, that was, you know, FDR and not the United States. Like, really? Come on. So it's not that you're wrong that the United States pushed or its influence into Western Europe or Eastern Europe, but I keep making that mistake. But Eastern Europeans actually wanted to be a part of NATO, actually wanted to be a part of that wing, that nuclear umbrella, that alliance that is more effectively, you know, a wing of the American empire. It's really the American empire in effect, which I can't look at and say that's not true. Because the United States is the one who subsidizes most of the militaries in Europe, who, you know, organizes most of the defense of NATO, and is kind of like the preeminent member of the alliance. In other words, when America plans something, most of the countries are like, oh, okay, let me see what I can do to help with that. When it comes to NATO. So it's effectively a wing of the American empire. But these countries willingly joined. You know, they didn't sit there. We didn't coerce them to join. In fact, after the invasion of Ukraine, Finland and Sweden both joined NATO, which is effectively, you know, still to this day, even with our current president, the wing of the American imperium. It really is. And those countries joined out of fear after they realized that being neutral, as Ukraine was, neutral ground, Ukraine wasn't a part of NATO, nor did it make any attempts to join NATO until it was invaded. Sorry. You can't look at the Ukrainians and blame them for wanting to join NATO, especially after the invasion, but you can't really blame the rest of the world, let me put it that way, the rest of Europe, for being afraid of you, who had the larger army, you know, 50 to 70 years ago, and threatened to, you know, topple all of the Western countries. You pushed them into the orbit of the United States, who was more than willing to help, because America thought, well, I need to contain this, because if I don't, then communism, they're just going to keep funding, these countries are going to keep funding each other, and one's going to fall and another's going to fall, and the domino theory, right? One's going to fall and another's going to fall and another's going to fall, because communists don't play fair. I mean, just ask Thailand's whole deal with Cambodia trying to, you know, abuse the fact that there's a border, right? No, you can't attack Cambodia because Cambodia is, you know, that would be attacking us, even though, so they harbored, Southeast Asian rebels for the communist rebels for the Thailand. And then those guys just moved over the border and attacked Thailand, right? So the communists don't play fair. So the United States said, well, if we just let this continue, it's going to continue to try and overtake countries. So we have to do something about it. And you continuing to pressure is what caused the American empire to exist at all. So it's just, that's kind of funny to me. Because in reality, what created the American empire, I mean, yes, the Nazis, the Japanese empire, right? Defeating them, obviously, right? But really, more realistically, the threat of the Russians is what pushed the rest of Europe into being willing to step underneath the American umbrella and step into the American empire as effective vassalages, even though America really doesn't demand that much out of them. America doesn't demand much out of its allies, never really has. Even to this day, it's more trying to get, with our current administration, it seems more like it's trying to get away. So, can Russia build an empire? Well, I'm going to say probably not. Because when you try to make one, is usually when it becomes too difficult to make one. I mean, most of the time, empires were gained after slow pushes of, well, yes, logical decisions, but also just victories, right? Military victories, but also things were driven to being manageable. For example, even the Spanish, who directly conquered, say, like the Inca, they were on the brink of losing on multiple occasions. And it's only because they barely came out. Now, that case, it's a little bit more overt. The Spanish were trying to make an empire. But in the case of, like, say, Paraguay or Gran Colombia, most of the time it's not successful. Most of the time when somebody says, I'm going to build an empire, they fail miserably. It's why we remember the people who try and succeed so much. We remember them. We say, wow, that was Napoleon Bonaparte. Wow, that's amazing. Whereas, nobody really remembers the guys who tried and failed. In fact, sometimes they're laughed at in history, depending on the person, i.e. someone like Hitler. So, it's not to say, like, that the Russians are wrong or evil or, for trying, I suppose. I guess it depends on the country's goals. But the fact that the Russians themselves think, oh, that's a weird picture. Sorry, I was on Google. It's the fact that you think, oh, let me just try and build an overt empire here, and you think that's going to work, is hilarious. Because the Russians have kind of been on the downward slope of their empire for the past almost 100 years. And you could blame most of it, yes, it's on Stalin. But the reality is that because of that event, because of the communist takeover, you've been on this downward trajectory ever since. And you've been getting weaker as the decades progress, not stronger. You've become less of a threat as time goes on, not more of one. In fact, looking back, it's kind of hilarious that the Americans were so afraid in 2008. And they made the Russians the big bad guys who, invaded the east coast of the United States, which is hilarious now, thinking about it, right? Even I think some of them said, had we known, we would not have made them the enemy. My bad. So, I don't know if I don't know if people understand. It's not that Russia's incompetent. It's not that Russia is a failure. It's that Russia is weakening in general and has been for a long time. The fall of the Soviet Union was just one step along the steps downwards. And as we get older, and to be fair, I'm pretty young, but as we get older, we're going to see Russia continue to weaken relatively to, say, powers like the United States, who's going to stay probably on the cutting edge and be still a first world, empire and power by the end of the century. Not to say that we won't see the rise of other places. We definitely will. The United States will not be alone. It will be a multipolar world. But relative to the US and the rest of the world, Russia is getting weaker. And relatively. Obviously, the technological development is still there. Obviously. Right? They're still making modern weapons. Obviously. They still have, especially in the weapons department, and I think that's probably because that's the one thing that the Soviets didn't try to gut and destroy. Whereas the United States still has like current and great music being made and obviously new weapons, but new technologies and new types of energy production and stuff. Whereas Russia really doesn't have that sort of innovation anymore. Now, yes, it does have to do with the fall of the Soviet Union. The fall of the Soviet Union was catastrophic on Russian institutions. And it means that Russia itself will weaken in the coming century, and it contributes to that. But you have to remember, this is a long-term kind of downward spiral for the Russians. And I don't know when they'll stop. I'm sure there will be a Russia in our future, right? By the end of the century, I'm almost positive that Russia will still exist. With its current borders, I have no idea. I'm not talking about the western part either. I'm talking about the eastern part with the very, very saber-rattling and aggressive Chinese. More like, and not the Russians in that case. Or not the Ukrainians or the Finns. That border is unlikely to change because Russia really, really cares about its Eastern European land holdings. Whereas I can really see if there's a civil conflict going on or the Russians have reached a criticality point and they're in civil unrest. I can really see them not, say, wanting to start a nuclear exchange with the Chinese over Vladivostok or Lake Baikal or even like the far east, like the Sea of Okhotsk, right? I could see them not wanting to start a conflict over that. They'd be like, whatever, it's because they're in their own shit, right? It's kind of like where the United States might lose influence, say, over the Balkans if it has its own civil war, but America would say, whatever, I'm too busy. Now, I'm not going to be like super apocalyptic about this because people have to remember, nothing ever happens. There's a nothing ever happens crowd. Everybody says Russia's going to fall tomorrow. No, it's not. Okay, I want that to be absolutely clear. Tomorrow, Russia is not going to fall apart. At least tomorrow. The day after, who knows? But Russia's not just going to fall apart. It's not going to collapse, right? That's not how countries and empires work, right? Because people are really quick to say this country's going to collapse or that country's going to collapse or this country's going to fall apart or that country's going to fall apart. And then when it doesn't happen like that, they get disappointed. But the reality is that, again, empires are like people, but they live for hundreds of years, close to thousands, sometimes thousands of years, right? And it takes a long time for them to deteriorate in health enough to perish, to pass away. It's kind of like your grandparents, right? Your grandparents, they didn't just, woke up, like they hit 70 and then suddenly they went from a gorgeous looking stud to a wrinkly old raisin, right? Like it wasn't just an instant where that happened. It was a gradual, slow process. The fall of the Soviet Union was just one step along the many steps. And the war in Ukraine, well, the Russians were going to get involved in a war somewhere because, obviously there's the Malthusian pressure, there is the desire to distract the populace, there's the conflicts around the world. It's almost like a country has to kind of go to war. And then there's the general bloodthirstiness that does exist across the planet right now, which does scare me. In certain parts of the world, the bloodthirstiness is rampant. But, the Russians aren't going to fall tomorrow. They may not fall in 30 years, right? Because it's not quick. Right? It's not like, oh, boom. Things, I mean, when things happen fast, they happen really fast. Like the month, not even, 2 or 3 weeks that it took for Syria to just fall apart. That took a really long time, but it was a slow, gradual process, and then suddenly, bang, it all fell apart. Nobody predicted that. Nobody. And the reality is, I don't think the Russians are going to be that way. The Russians still have a sense of pride for their own country, their own civilization, the Orthodox Church even, but to a lesser extent. I think it's upwards of only 30% now. That's the rebound. It used to be less than 10% during the Soviet era, and now it's rising, and it's still continuing to rise. Last I checked, the Orthodox world is making a comeback. The Orthodox Church in the East. Or Eastern Europe. And that's probably going to continue. And she still believes, she's very Russian. She's still very proud of her history and her country and her culture. And that's enough, I think, to guarantee her survival. Because there's not enough of people who say, oh, whatever. There is a lot of whatever in Russia. That's kind of why, like, there's not a whole lot of putting in like that extra effort into gaining that prestige or trying hard or, inventing something new. That kind of like there's a lot of drones in Russia, people who just drone on, which is really sad, because they have a great history, a great country, that has very ancient foundations. But there is a lot of drones. But they still believe in themselves. They're still proud to be Russian. Even if that quote unquote Russian is just, here's what I did in the past and not here's what I'm doing now. Here's my history and tradition. Here's the food I eat, the way I dance, right? From my past, this is all cultural past. Not stuff that she's actively doing now. Whereas Americans still have like, oh yeah, the SpaceX stuff and the Blue Origin stuff and all the CRISPR with, genetic engineering, which is present progressive, right? This is like the America's doing this now. But Russia still believes in herself. And I think that actually makes it more likely that she survived than a country that's like, that doesn't. Like some Balkan countries. Just don't believe in themselves. They might be proud. They just hate each other, really, more realistically. Or parts of even Western Europe who really don't believe in themselves at all. Like the UK does not believe in itself anymore. So it really isn't a surprise that it's been less than 100 years and their empire completely is disappeared. It doesn't exist anymore. Just gone. The British don't believe in themselves anymore, which is crazy because the last thing their empire did before vanishing was win the war against the Nazis, which is like, wow, good job, right? And then poof, just gone. It's like, what? Wait a minute. That was a great run, right? From an empire standpoint, not from a moral standpoint, but from an empire standpoint, like, whoa, that was a great run. Where'd you go? And for my final act, I shall defeat Germany and then perish. I apologize. But like, you'd think with how, like, okay, I can't even remember. I lost my train of thought. See that? It was so quick. Oh, the Russians. Right. But most of the time it's a gradual, slow thing. Britain aside, it's usually a gradual, slow process for a country to slowly fall apart to the point where it just ceases to function. And that's a slow it took hundreds of years for the Romans to finally kick the bucket. Hundreds. It was problems that slowly eroded the nation until it just stopped existing. Now, I don't know if it's going to be that apocalyptic for the Russians. And in the Romans' case, there was a severe lack of trust in the society to the point where there was 12 emperors in 1 year when it was nearing its death. That's how little trust people had. The term Emperor of Rome just meant nothing anymore. Where people are like, oh, you're emperor? Well, I'm going to proclaim myself too. It's just a lack of trust in the institution. Now, Russia's not that bad. But if there is no reversing, it's not out of the question that in 100 years, if nothing changes from here till then, I mean, from 2020 to 2120, if nothing changes for the Russians, it's not out of the question that they could cease to exist. Now, I don't think they will, to be fair. I think there's enough pride, and I actually think the rise of the Orthodox Church in Russia might actually do it some good of starting to believe in itself again and believe in the beauty of the world. Because the more spiritual a place or region is, with a religion, is the more it admires things about the world, and the more it looks on the world with hope. Whereas the more irreligious a society, the more kind of depressed it becomes. It might be effective, technologically, but it will be depressed while it's doing that. It'll be sadly exploring the stars. So if there's no change for the Russians, I just don't see it for them. I don't see it in the cards that they survive. Now, to be fair, I think they will, but I don't think that transition. I think that transition is going to happen as they are losing territory, because it takes pressure from the outside for people and countries to actually change. It takes pressure from the outside. And an outside could mean a domestic issue. That sounds hilarious, right? What? What do you mean outside? If it's a domestic issue, then it's not. Well, outside pressure could be anything. It could be nature. In the case of what Denmark created some natalist ad recently. You should look it up. It's crazy. Because they realized, wait a minute, I'm going to run out of people in 100 years. I'm going to have like half the population. We need to do something to stabilize this at least, at least stabilize the birth rate, not necessarily go positive, but we need to like stabilize it. Like, this is crazy. So Denmark's realized that recently. And that's, that's arguable. That is doing something about what's going on. But I would argue that's an outside pressure. Because it's nature's pressure on you. Now that you're like, oh shit, wait a minute. Oh no, I've got to do something about this. And obviously there's the invasions and, of different countries. That obviously creates pressure. Oh, I heard a Ukrainian soldier. I don't remember where this quote was, but I heard it, when I was watching videos about Ukraine, years ago when the war first started. They said, I don't really know if we were a country before, but we certainly are now. I'm like, whoa. I felt that one. That one gave me chills. I was like, yo, that was impressive. I like that. But it doesn't work when you try to build an empire. Yes, there's good rulers who realize that they're in the rising empire phase, or maybe it's like intuitively they realize, and then they do work to make that, they maximize that strength and power. That's, we remember those as great leaders of countries. But the reality is that I don't think, it doesn't matter how good a leader is, because there's more to a country than just one person. There's also the society and the culture and the way people believe and if they're having kids or not. And, how do they see the future? How do they see the past? Right? Like, all that's important. It's all important to factor into whether or not a country is on its rise or on its decline. And it's almost like you can't stop it once it's started. It's not something that you stop. It's something that people can. The greatest example of this is actually the Meiji Restoration in Japan. Because a lot of people are like, oh my God, the Emperor Meiji and, the samurai class who helped him. Oh, what a great set of leaders, like, oh, they were amazing. Without them, Japan wouldn't have been industrialized. I'm like, yeah, that's true. But you also have to remember the people themselves, the common folk, the common peasants, basically. They had this euphoria when it started that was like, change for the future. And they were just happy about it for whatever reason. And it just kind of infected the general populace. And that, plus their actions, is what led to first world Japan that we have today. Because it's also what matters what the people say. You can do all of the work in the world to industrialize, but if the people aren't behind you, it doesn't matter. You know, Pakistan did its very best when it first started to try and create a multi, like, national nation, basically. It tried to create a not even multi-ethnic, really. It was a multi collection of people. There was a certain collection of people. You know, because Pakistan itself is an acronym. And that look what happened to it, right? It didn't matter what its founder, what was their founder's name actually? Let me look that up really quick. Oh, that's crazy. Let me look at it. Let me look that up really quick. Who founded it? Because I can see his face, but I can't remember his name. Founder of Pakistan. Give me a minute, guys. Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Muhammad Ali is a common name. Like, jeez. So Jinnah, his dream. Yeah, this is the guy. I recognize him. His dream was like a multicultural Pakistan that was secular, like Turkey, and it failed. But why did the Turks succeed? Well, because in the case of Pakistan, its people didn't really believe in that. A lot of them were displaced folks who had just showed up to a new country because they fled from where they used to live in India. You know, there used to be Muslims all throughout the Indian subcontinent, not just two locations, Bangladesh and Pakistan. But, you know, tons of people fled, sometimes hundreds of miles to get into their respective country. You know, they didn't have any sort of loyalty to the system that Jinnah created. Jinnah also didn't have that sort of like, yes, call to arms that Ataturk had, because Ataturk won a war that he shouldn't have won. The Turkish Republic, you know, the pushing for, you know, the Republic of Turkey's independence, you know, Ataturk won many battles that proved his military genius. And that kind of had like a, whoa, like, look, he's amazing. Jinnah didn't have that. So there is a little bit of that. There is a little bit of like, he's not in the same caliber as Ataturk. But at the same time, you know, if the people weren't behind him, it doesn't matter, which is why Pakistan is kind of an abomination now. It's an abomination to its initial dream. It's secular-ish, but on a local level, more flirts with Islamism than it does. Which is funny because India went the exact opposite way, which India flirts with Hindu nationalism, but India itself doesn't snap its fingers and then, like, you know, oh, well, I'm going to cut off people's hands because they stole something. With the same degree that Pakistan does on a local level. India doesn't do that. As long as they can keep it. It's not like it's gone unchallenged. So if the people aren't behind your vision, it doesn't matter how much effort you put in. And the problem with Putin and in Russia is that the Russians don't have a vision. Could like, think about it. Could you give me an example of a Russian vision? The Russians' vision. What do they want for the future? You know, they might give arbitrary, like, the defense of Russia. Okay, what does that mean? Where do you draw that line? Shouldn't you have drawn that line on the Balkan countries? But all those are in NATO. What about Finland? You drew the line there. Is the line Ukraine? What about Belarus? What about Poland? Poland used to be in your orbit 50 years ago. Where's the line? What does that mean? You know, it's too vague. It's kind of like why, you know, you have war hawks sometimes. Well, it used to be more common, but now it's not so much. You know, like 20 years ago, war hawks used to say, you know, like, oh, for the American defense. But nowadays, America's like, okay, well, what does that mean? What are you fighting to defend by fighting in the desert? And I'm a veteran too. I've been to the Middle East. And I was there for the end of G1. I was there as the war closed. Have a ribbon and everything. for it, which makes me feel very old. Because they don't give that out anymore. It's a retired ribbon, basically, kind of like the Vietnam or Korean War ribbons. You know, like, what does that mean? When somebody says, oh, yeah, well, we're fighting to defend our interests. Okay, that's vague. That doesn't mean anything. You know, America has something it stands for. It does. Even if people would argue it's not in that case, or you would argue the debate of how actually free it is, freedom is what America says it's defending. Always. That's its vision, its goal. That's what people dream of tomorrow. Even whether it's the left or it's the right, they disagree on the vision, you know, what the vision of freedom is. You know, they both have their own versions in their head of what it is. But both of them, if asked, will say they value freedom. Both of them will say that. That's America's belief and vision, and it's actually what drives her to continue expanding her empire, or at least used to. Nowadays, it's kind of, I think, her empire's kind of stabilized along its borders. She's not making any new incursions. She's more rallying other countries that have empirical potential, like the Indians, I think, and the Turks, and you know, to a lesser extent, we're still poking the Japanese to try and get them up, but I doubt they're going to get up, and I doubt they're going to be able to do that. What our expectation is for the Far East. But, you know, the United States, it's a belief, and that's what pushes it out. It's like, I will believe in freedom. This is my belief. I believe in the statutes of liberty and personal, you know, self-determination. And America says that. That's its vision. What do you believe, Russia? I'll wait. And I'm not doing that to be like, ha, I got you. I dissed you, Russia. No, it's more like hey, have a conversation with yourself of what you want. Because you're never going to do all of the things that you want to do. You're never going to push out and gain prestige again. Let's just say that. Without that vision. And I mean, fuck the empire, right? What about, like, the basis? Because everybody likes the term empire. Everybody likes the oh, look at this imperia. Oh, so amazing. But they forget, like, all the pillars that stand beneath that empire that make it possible. Things like religion or family or community. Things like the respect for, like, personal, like, to a degree, personal freedoms. Not necessarily, like, always respecting them, but to a degree, some level of personal, like, accountability. Right. And some, like, zeitgeist of the people that lets them, what's the term? Make new discoveries, right? That plus institutions, which is farther up the chain, right? Those are like baseline. And then you have a concrete slab of institutions. Those all feed into institutions, which fuel the empire and build the army that makes the empire. If you don't have community or family or, you know, a sense of personal accountability or, you know, some level of individualism, right? Even if it's low, even if it's a low level, but some level of individualism, kind of like the Greeks had some low level of individualism, or there wouldn't have been new philosophers or new thinkers, right? If there's no zeitgeist to make discoveries, then what are you trying to do? You don't even have that. You don't even have the basis of what can feed into your institutions. So your institutions are going to slowly, because this doesn't happen overnight, are going to slowly weaken, and as a result, your empire is going to slowly weaken along with it until the institutions collapse. So if you don't make these happen, it doesn't matter. So yeah, you need to have the conversation of what do I want? Like, what do I believe? What is my vision? What is my vision? Right? You need to have that. But you need to have all these pillars too, because if you don't have those pillars, then you're wasting time. Because you're going to think and you're going to lie to yourself and tell yourself you're amazing and big and strong, but in reality, you're weakening. You've been, like, I think Russia's been shrinking. Hold on, let's check the Russian population. Because I think Russia's been shrinking like Japan for a little while now. Obviously, there was a shrink right immediately after the 90s, but then she recovered a little bit, and now she's shrinking again, yes. She actually started shrinking just before the war broke out. Her population number started to go down. Yeah. Mostly in let me see. Yeah, in 2019 to 2020, and then suddenly her population started decreasing. So, Canada is slowly rising. That makes sense. Ukraine's has been dropping for a long time. But right, if you don't have any of those baseline things, a baseline community, a religion, that zeitgeist to make discoveries, like the euphoria amongst people, like they believe in the future. They're not drones, basically. They're not wandering around like thinking who cares? What's the point, right? And you have a sense of like personal accountability / individualism, right? Not necessarily individualism, like not like radical individualism like the West, but certain levels of individualistic ability. Then it doesn't matter. You could put all the effort you could possibly want into Ukraine, into your future power and stuff, but you're slowly going to be falling apart. And that's the reality. Like, nobody's really afraid of you anymore because you lied about the amount of tanks you had ready. Now you're finally starting to get some of them working again. But you left them out, and then you counted the ones that were left out that hadn't had maintenance on them in decades. I've done maintenance on vehicles. I've done maintenance on like Humvees. And I tell you what, those things, if you don't run them for like 2 weeks, they will break down. Some of them will just stop turning on. And you're telling me for years you left some of these tanks out in these yards and you counted them? Like, look how many tanks we have. Oh, amazing. You just assumed they were functioning. That doesn't make me confident that your nuclear arsenal, which you brag about all the time, is actually what you say it is. Now, obviously, you have working ones. Duh. There's no way you would let that fall apart completely. But I'm thinking it's much, much less than you think it is. Because the United States, for example, decommissions its nuclear weapons, and everybody's like, oh my God, good job, America, yay, contributing to stepping away from Armageddon. But America is really doing it because they're old. They're old. They take upkeep too. They slowly fall apart. Sometimes they just get dangerous to keep around. You're like, all right, look, this thing's deteriorating. So this thing's from like the 60s and 70s. Let's just get rid of it. Every single nuclear missile from the Russians right now was made in the Soviet era. The vast majority. I don't even know. Let's actually look at that up. We can look that up right now. Yeah. Let's see here. Not chemical weapons, not biological, radiological. No. Plutonium? Reactive. Let's see. I'm not seeing it. There's a bunch of allegations and stuff, but they're not making a list of actual missile types. Oh, here we go, I think. They estimate around 5,000. Whoops. Okay, let's see. The Satan too. That's hilarious. Let me see. I'm probably going to be wrong about that. It's actually starting to look like I am. 2006, 2003. Entered service. Oh no, it began in the 80s. It was redesigned in 92. Okay, so that one, yeah. The Sarmat is new. But yeah, the vast majority of them. The R36. Well, the Sarmat is intended to replace the R36. Yeah, there's the nuclear torpedo, which I don't believe exists, by the way. I think they're bluffing. That's definitely a huge bluff. Because you can't just detonate a nuke and start a tsunami. That's just not how it works. Tsunamis are caused by much more massive shifts in displacement of water that echo throughout the entire ocean. Right? It's more like a whole water column, More a whole water column moving. Which is why if you're out at sea, you might not even notice a tsunami pass under you because it's the whole column of water under you moving. So you might go over this, you might gradually go up and then gradually come down and not even notice that you just went over, the tsunami just passed you by and was heading for the coast. It's not until it gets close to the coast that that column of water starts to emerge out of the water into the air because it gets shallower. It's not that easy to do that. That's definitely bullshit. It's definitely them bullshitting. It's made to replace the R36. The R36, yeah. The R36 is old. Yep, 1988 to the present service history. It's just old warheads. And that's not to say that they don't work, but it's like with the condition of tanks that you have, I don't even want to know. With a condition that, if you ever seen, you should definitely look this up. Like Laserpick has got a good video where he talks about the Moskva. If that was their flagship, oh my god, I can only imagine how their nuclear program is actually doing. Like, how many of these actually function? How much of these are working? Right? How much of these are like actually working and can like do damage? Not to say that they don't have any, they definitely do. But like, if most of them are like I see. Missile field still has its missile fields, duh. Nuclear bombers. Well, that doesn't really mean so long-term bombers are not a thing really anymore, so that's not a worry. I mean, you can do that, but they're gonna get shot down. Ballistic missile submarines. Okay, see, those might be more. But then again, those might misfire too. See, the Soviet Union was much more on the cutting edge of technology than the Russians are today. Back then, and if you look at their own nuclear submarine programs, oh, it was just waft with absolute, like, it's just filled with failure after failure after failure, accident after accident after accident, because they cut corners. I'm more than willing to bet that after its institutions failed and the Russians have gotten worse, not better, that it's the same thing now. Status 6 appears to be torpedoes, mini submarine can travel at speeds of weapon of last resort. It appears to be a torpedo shaped like a robotic mini submarine that can travel at speeds of 100 knots. More recent information suggests top speed of 54 knots. Yeah, that's right. Shut up. Stop exaggerating, Russia. We don't believe you. Like, what is it? They told us that some of their missiles were hypersonic, and then we intercepted them with the Patriot system, which is impossible, by the way. Hypersonic missiles are not supposed to be able to be intercepted. And then people are like, oh, they didn't say that. Like, dude, we have the Cotton 4K. What are you talking about? Cloaked by stealth technology. Yeah, pretty vague. Several new classes of nuclear weapons previously speculated to exist. Putin discussed several new and upgraded weapons, including the hypersonic non-ballistic atmosphere entry. Whoa. Hypersonic glide vehicle. Yeah, I don't believe you. After your hypersonics failed, you know, with the Patriot system we gave the Ukrainians and it started to shoot down your quote unquote hypersonics. Yeah, it's clear. They're just, that's the problem, right? They lie too much. So now I can't trust anything you say. You might have actually a really decent weapon, but I can't believe you. You're like, oh, just believe us. Oh, right. Like I was supposed to believe you about your tanks and about your Moskva and about your missiles. Nuclear armed cruise missile. Effectively unlimited range. Well, that doesn't, yeah. Sarmat, yep. Expanded upon the range and carrying capability of the Soviet-era Satan ICBM, because it's the Satan II. Putin suggested an online poll be conducted to give them official public names. Wow, that's mighty, oh, that's 2018. That explains it. I was like, wow, that's mighty considerate of you. Anyways. Yes. So far they only have one new missile that they've developed and that they say is deployed right now, which is the Sarmat, or the Satan, quote unquote Satan 2. Does it say, can you estimate how many they have? Because that will be helpful. In service since 2023, yeah. This is the only new one. But since it's new, it's probably not common. Now, it's not to say that their old Soviet stuff won't work. It's just that it's old. This is almost 40 years old. And judging by how you took care of your flagship and your tanks, like, I'm not confident that your nuclear arsenal isn't the same way. That you aren't just keeping stockpiles of them, most of them unable to be fired, most of them not ready to be fired, and then bluffing about what you actually have. Say like your nuclear Poseidon torpedo, which is definitely just fear-mongering, guys. Like, there's no way they have that. Okay, I'm going to be confident in saying that doesn't exist. Okay, then they almost certainly have a nuclear torpedo. That's not new or abnormal at all. It's not. Nor that it might be a high-yield nuclear torpedo, too. It might be in the megatons, for example. Which is something that the Russians, like, weren't common to have back then. Because it's hard to fit that much into something so small as a torpedo. A torpedo is much smaller than a bomb or a missile, so. So I wouldn't be surprised if they have something like that. But it's not going to cause a tsunami. That takes so much more energy than people think it does. The entire Earth's crust has to move. Huge, massive fault lines, thousands of miles long, shift in order to make a tsunami. Like millions of tons of material falling into the ocean in order to create a tsunami. Oh yes, they can create a tsunami upwards of, what do they say, 100 meters? Bullshit, Russia. Bullshit. That's like the meteor that killed the dinosaurs level, like, big. No, you don't have something like that, and we know you don't. Shut up. Be truthful, please, so we could, like, match each other rather than us sitting here, like, being afraid. It's kind of like with a fox bat, you know? They've been lying for decades. And we just, I mean, to be fair, we assumed it was, but they let us assume that it was a fighter. And then we built the Eagle, the best fighter in all history. In response, turns out the fox bat is just a piece of shit. Built for a different era, the past, not the future. That's crazy. They've been lying for a long time, so I don't really believe the Russians about any of the equipment or technology they say they have. The Sarmat doesn't give me an estimation of how many they have. I'm more than willing to bet it's less than 100. because it's new, obviously. I mean, it's only been in service since 2023. Or at least that's what this says. Expected to be ready for play in 2020. That it would, in his opinion, constitute 100% of Russia's fixed land-based nuclear arsenal by 2021. That's hilarious now. They tested in 2016 the R-28's first stage engine. Prototype missiles have been already built and delivered to their Cosmodrome for trials, but the test was delayed to recheck. That was in 2017. Let's see here. Late 2017, the first launch test of the missile was carried out. A few missile dozens kilometers fell within the first test range. 2018. Tests of the missiles begun shortly after an anonymous military source was cited. In 2007, information about the Sarma missile had been leaked to the U.S. deliberately. Why? In 2018, the Russian Defense Ministry published a video showing the Sarma performing second successful test launch from the Plesk Cosmodrome. Okay, so this seems to be good. In 2019, the expedition of the modern weapon systems. To be fair, it's kind of like, then again, you know, like how many of North Korea's missiles will fire? Okay, well they do successful tests all the time. Yeah, but they pour all their energy and effort to a single test to make it look good. I'm not saying that we should doubt the Russians that much. I'm not saying that. Absolutely not. No. The Russians are not North Korea. I mean, not yet. Hopefully that's not the plan. It was reported Sarmat was capable of 22,000 miles suborbital flight. The trials of mixed missile complex were expected to be complete in 2021. Planned to be rearmed with the 20 missile regiments with the SR-21. After a test on May 22nd, 2022, 50 new would soon be combat ready. The test of the RS-28 missile was conducted by the Russian Federation. The U.S. claimed that this test was unsuccessful, but is not confirmed or denied by the Russian government, which means it was a failure. The Russians would just said, no, we succeeded. Here's the data. 2023, Director Yuri Baraznov said the Westman system had been placed on official combat duty. 2023. 2024, defense-related media reported that the SR-28 test at Plesk Cosmodrome had failed. Russian authorities had not commented on the test. Okay, so well, why would you officially leak it and then not comment on the test? The failure could be the missile exploding during ignition. Is that the video of that missile going up and then coming back down? No, I'm just kidding. I was like, you came out of the silo and then came right back. There's no way. That'd be hilarious for once. The test failure and the launch silo destruction led analysts to believe the subsequent RS testing would be delayed. So they are lying. Like, what? Oh my God. Russia, what? Come on. People are like, oh, you don't know that. Like, dude, why would they, quote, purposely leak the information and then suddenly it's not? Like, suddenly it's not working, right? Oh, we purposely told you in 2007. Oh, okay. To, like, scare us? Yeah, to scare you. Yeah, because we're strong again. Okay. By the way, your missile test failed. No comment. Dude, that's like, if Russia doesn't respond to something like that, that's definite for sure that it failed. No reports of successful testing. And this is their only new missile. Yeah. Anyways, I'm not scared of their nuclear arsenal. One, I'm not going to gamble with it. Obviously, it's stupid to gamble with World War III. But I'm serious when I say to people, relax. Like, it's not, there's no nuclear war happening tomorrow. It's not. I promise you, you're going to be okay. It's not happening tomorrow. It's not. And, like, the Russians and the Americans really don't have a reason to go at it right now. They don't have, like, even during Biden's presidency. there's not really a reason for us to throw nukes at each other. It just doesn't make sense. And again, it's not to say that none of their missiles work. It's just they're extremely old. And, all of them, because it seems like the SR-28 isn't ready, all of them are from the Soviet era. And those ones are 40 years old. At least 40 years old. At least. Because you have to remember, it was the early 90s that the Soviet Union fell apart. Institutions collapsed, and therefore it was harder to fuel the military with new advances in technology, because institutions matter. And the institutions have never recovered in Russia. They haven't, ever. Life is better now than it was back during the immediate Soviet collapse, which is why Russians appreciate Putin. But its institutions weren't rebuilt. And therefore, while it's, arguably more pleasant because Russia has, stopped the fire from burning after the Soviet Union collapsed, it hasn't gone on to make advancements to make it keep up with the West and, by extension, the American empire. So it's not impressed. I'm not impressed. Let me put it that way. Nor am I afraid. You're going to be okay. It's going to be fine. The Poseidon torpedo, it's definitely bullshit. Definitely. It's not real. Okay? I'm sure they have a new nuclear torpedo that they put into a Russian sub. The supposed yield is probably not that intense. And before you say, well, the American military said, I'm going to put that on pause and say to you, they have every incentive to make their enemies sound as bad and as effective as possible so that they get more funding from the government because they're a special interest group. So they're going to make the enemy sound bad and not reveal, say, ooh, it's classified. It's cool classified information that, the Russians are actually bullshitting or the Chinese are actually bullshitting. That's classified. Right? That's classified information, but in reality, it's just like, hey, it's not, Russia's not all that when it comes to even the nuclear arsenal. Not to say they're not functioning. Again, I'm sure a lot of them aren't, just because they're old. And seeing how we take care of our Humvees, which are in regular use, and how we decommission missiles in the United States all the time when they get too old. That's what we're doing. You think, we're decommissioning to make ourselves look nice. No. We're decommissioning because they're old, and we're getting rid of them. Because we're not just sitting here making new nuclear warheads. I actually wonder about that. Has the U.S. made any new nuclear warheads? This is going to be more transparent because the Americans are like, nuclear weapons of the United States. 1939. First nuclear weapon test. 45, of course. Delivery systems. Current status. The NPT, one of 4 countries wielding a nuclear triad. As of 2017, U.S. has estimated 4,018 nuclear warheads in storage or deployment. Storage, yeah. Storage means they're not ready to be fired. And it means they don't matter because in a first strike capability, the silos are going to be targeted first. So what matters is what's ready to be fired. This figure computes a peak of 31,000 total warheads in 1967 and 22,000 in 1989. It does not include several thousand warheads that have been retired or rescheduled for dismantlement. The Obama administration got rid of the policy of use and got written motions to develop new ones. They got rid of a Bush-era policy outlawing the goal of the world without nuclear weapons. Russian President Dmitry started in 2018 to reduce the number of active nuclear warheads from 22,000 to 1,500. new plans, the U.S. government would fund research and development of new nuclear cruise missiles. The Trump and Biden administration continued with these plans. As of, well, tell us exactly where they are. As of 2021, American nuclear forces on land consists of, we have exact numbers, that's crazy. Minutemen III ICBMs. Started in 66, 68. The existing Minutemen III missiles. Okay, so here's the thing. They're from the 60s. I'm like, oh boy, how old are these shits? Are they falling apart too? Is everybody's nuclear weapons just falling apart? Now okay, so we have Minutemen III missiles have further improved over the decades in service, with $7 billion spent in the 2010s to upgrade the 450 missiles from the 60s era. $450 operational launchers. Air Force Global Strike Command. Ooh, that's a cool ass name. Sorry. 14 nuclear capable Ohio class Trident submarines. Those are top tier. Those are like, those nukes are gonna work. 9 in the Pacific and 5 in the Atlantic. Wow, how do you know that? That's crazy. Nuclear capabilities in the air provided by 60 nuke capable heavy bombers, 20 B-2 bombers, and 4 B-52 bombers. Nuclear bombers are so so outdated though. Let's be honest. Those are gonna get shot down. Like, what are you talking about? Air Force is, yep, here it is. Modernizes its missiles to last through to 2030. So you need to set up replacing them in 2029. So in 4 years. But it seems like the Minutemen IIIs are the only ones we have. That does make it easier to maintain, though, because, you know, there's less of them. Oh. It's heralded by there as a response to the U.S. prompt global strike. Conventional prompt strike. Yeah, the Russians only have this nuclear torpedo, which is definitely new. The R-28 Sarmat, which has apparently not had a successful test. I'm sure I could find videos of success. Let me look this up. Let me just, yeah, switch. Sarmat. Missile test explosion? Wait a minute. No way, no way. Hold on. Oh man, I wish I was streaming. Oh, they have satellite images. Oh, of the before and after. Oh, something blew up there. So there's a chance they could nuke themselves. Somebody in the comments. Yo, what the fuck? Yeah, there's a before and after image. It's kind of funny, like, because you can't hide anything anymore. So there's Sarmat has failed. I don't see anything about them modernizing. Let me look at the ones they're still using, the R36, which is old too, but that's fine as long as they modernized it. I want to be fair to the Russians. Extremely large number of reentry vehicles. Some 36 missiles have been converted into the Dnieper medium lift vehicles. Oh, orbit vehicles. Okay, so some of them were decommissioned and designed at 62. R-36M missiles instead of dropping those age past their designed operational lifetime. Okay, so they have gotten rid of some of them. As of 2020, the Strategic Missile Troops has 46 R-36 M2s in active service. Only 46. In an agreement with Ukraine that will regulate cooperation between two countries maintaining the R, is reported that the cooperation with you and Ukraine will allow Russia to extend in service life at least to 10 to 28 years. Two of them, which became operational in September of 2023, but that's what they say it became operational, but it's like it failed its tests. We don't have any confirmed reports that it's successful. And if you only have 40 left, what's the vast majority of the rest of your missiles? I've got to look this up. Hold on. Like, I've got to find something. There's got to be like a YouTube video or something about it. Like, I apologize. Maybe I should be showing my screen to you guys, but number and types. No. Everybody wants a scale. I'm not looking for scale. Let's see here. This is old though. They're decommissioning them. I have no good, just the numbers of warheads. Okay, so most of them seem to be R-36s still then. Most of ours is still, most all of our ready fired ones is Minuteman 3s. But apparently we've, in 2010s, we dedicated $7 billion in order to modernize all of them. Which means they're probably in good shape. That's only 15 years ago. But ultimately, the only thing that matters is first strike capability. So the United States has about 500 ready to fire. And the Soviet Union probably also, Russia also has about probably 500 ready to fire. The United States has our Minuteman 3s, and Russia has the R-36. The Sarmat's not ready. I don't. I just literally saw a video before and after the test launch site before and after, and it was blown up. Like they didn't announce anything officially, but the United States posted before and after images of the test site, the site they were going to test the missile at, and it was something blew up. It was blown up, so they failed. No tests have been conducted since. Russia's doesn't really have the ability to get its hands on resources to do that right now. Anything it would have to get would be funneled through China, which means that China is now probably the primary partner in that relationship, which wasn't the case 20 years ago. It's crazy how fast things change, though, if you think about it. But anyways, regardless, don't be afraid of their nuclear arsenal. It's not as impressive as you think it is. What matters is what can be fired first, because all of them are going to be targeted anyways, right? All the silos are going to be targeted. America has the silos in Russia targeted. Russia has the silos in America targeted. These are actually far away from populated centers and cities. So people are like, oh, they're going to target us first. You know, we're New York or we're Washington, D.C. No, you'll definitely be the target of a couple, but no, most of them are going to be shot at the silos and the storage units that the U.S. has and vice versa, which means it's going to be out in the middle of nowhere. So if you live close to a nuclear silo out in the middle of Montana, yeah, consider moving. But anyways, I was just getting to the fact that it's not as scary as you'd think. It's not scary as you think. It's not as fearful as you think. It's not like, that's not the biggest fear. And in fact, if anything, the fact that Russia's institutions are failing is more showing of like, it needs to focus on the basic stuff, which I do see some of that to an extent. I will admit there is some of that to an extent of focusing more on family again within Russian peoples. But it is slow, but that's good. That means that it's happening, because it's going to be slow. It's not like overnight. Overnight barely happens in history. It's not that overnight a country's just like, yep, we're doing this now. That does happen, but it's less common. The fact that it's happening at all is a good sign. I don't know if it's soon enough or if it's going to take charge enough in Russia to prevent it from losing Eastern Siberia to the Chinese, just because of a numbers game, but also because it has everything that China needs. It has abundant resources. China has wanted to take Vladivostok for a long time. It was always a historically Chinese city, they say. And that's true. It was. It was. For the Qing dynasty owned it. It's a part of the Manchu region. And, the Lake Baikal would solve all of China's water problems because they have water problems right now. And it's just north of Mongolia. It's not even that far away. It's very close to China. I don't know if it's quick enough that as things get more difficult, as, people start to disappear and the population collapse begins. And it has begun. It's just, again, it takes a long time. These are people's lives we're talking about. They're not just a resource that just disappears. People take a long time to die, obviously. By 2030 or 40, I think we're going to be really feeling this, though. 2030 to 40 is when you're really going to start, the world is going to start feeling the population crunch. I wish I had my mug for water. Kind of missing that right now, so I don't have no idea where it is. But yeah. So I am optimistic in the long term for the Russians, not in the short term. But again, it's not like apocalyptic, right? You have to remember, Russia's going to collapse. Russia's going to engage in a civil war. Probably not tomorrow. And probably not the day after. And probably not the next month. And probably not the next year. You have to remember, these things take a long time. But when things snap, they snap really quickly. Just ask Syria. And Syria had been teetering for a long time. People said that, like, Syria should have fallen a long time ago. It does take a long time for things to fall. It's not just tomorrow, Syria will collapse. It's like, no, it took a month. And even then, that was a long time coming. Decay takes a long time. Don't expect the Russians to be going anywhere anytime soon. I don't think the Russians really make sense, though. And this is going to sound controversial, especially nowadays with the war in Ukraine going on and all this other stuff. And I'm not dissing any Ukrainians if they're listening or watching or, what's going on here. But the Russians make more sense as an American ally now than they do as an American enemy. Because the Russians themselves are experiencing a population drop. There are emptying villages there too, not just in Japan. There are emptying villages in Russia. And Russian interests pit them against the rising Chinese. And the United States doesn't have a reason to be enemies with the Russians anymore. There's no spreading of international communism. And with the war in Ukraine as evidence, America's not really afraid of Russia anymore. And rightfully so. Americans are not like, oh, the Russians are going to attack us and they're going to defeat us. It's like, okay, please. I doubt they could defeat the French Foreign Legion now in their current condition. But, right, I do think they will continue to exist and they will continue to be a country. They will continue to be a nation. If the Russians and the Americans could ever be allies, and I'm just spitballing here, again, Ukraine, put down the pitchforks, please. If the Americans and the Russians could ever be allies, I could definitely see the Americans trying to use the Russians as a way of leverage against the Chinese, right? And the Chinese expansion and the rise of China. Because the rise of China, although I don't see that happening, and that's kind of like to Russia's detriment, because that would actually make Russia's borders, as they currently are, more secure in the future if the Americans were more ally and less enemy. But I don't know how far that will go within the Russian elite. How well that would go over. A lot of the people in the Russian elite are still, again, people who remember the Soviet Union or worked under the Soviet Union. So, it'd be a long time before I think we could be friends, and I don't know if Russia has that time when it comes to these areas and regions. And you have to remember, the Chinese have nukes too. And probably around the same amount that can be fired. If the Russians have about 500 to 1,000 and we have 500 to 1,000 that can be fired, I think the Chinese, who don't have much, significantly less than both of us, still have the same first strike capability. Because even if you have less in reserve, it doesn't matter. Like, you have to boost the amount you have to match your enemies, right? Your amounts you field. If you have, even if the Romans have 500 trimenes, and the Carthaginians have 1,000, right? But they field 500, but they have, like, say, another 500 in storage, and the Romans have 500 and they have 2 in storage. You're gonna field 500, obviously. So it's the same thing. So there's no nuclear, Russians are like, well, we'll just nuke you. I'm like, okay, Russia, you get nuked in return. I don't know if it's going to be worth that much of a headache. Care more about Europe, I think, in my opinion, in the immediate. Europe is kind of focused on you. And the Chinese can slowly, infiltrate Eastern Siberia with jobs and markets and sending foreign workers and, developmental programs in order to slowly boost the number of Chinese in Eastern Siberia. Because remember, Siberia, there is around in total 3 million to, I think, 5 million Russians on one side of the border. And in Manchuria alone, there's 200 million Chinese. Wow. It's like most of the United States population just in Manchuria alone. That's crazy. China's huge. Yo, what the... And there's a lot of Chinese people. But, again, missed opportunities for us to work together, so who knows. Anyways, that was a short, I guess, rant about the current, state of Russia. What I think they'll do in the future is I think they're gonna lose territory because we're not friends, and I don't think that they're going to be friends, but I don't know how much. Eastern Siberia, I think, to the Chinese pretty much. I'm pretty confident of that one. But, central parts of central, north of Kazakhstan, less confident about that one. They might keep that one. Anything to the west of the Ural Mountains is going to remain Russia. And if it doesn't, the Russians will bleed themselves dry over it, no matter who is there, no matter who's trying to rebel, even with the Tartars nearby in like close to the Ural Mountains on the west side. Even if they have higher birth rates and they like slowly start to replace the Russians will fight tooth and nail for it. So I don't think so. Anything west of the Urals is going to remain Russia. And Russia will remain a country. But that's the long term. We're talking about like 100, 200 years. That's like a 100, 200 years statement right there. And a lot happens in 200 years. If you don't think so, think about how different 1825 is to 2025. That's 200 years right there. Yeah, very different world. A lot of stuff happens in 200 years. Again, it's not the immediate. Russia will maintain its border integrity for a long time, I think, for the foreseeable future. And I don't, but that's what it goes down to. Russia, you can't build an empire. Nobody builds an empire on purpose. The Americans didn't build an empire on purpose. They built one that they didn't think was an empire, until recently, where they started to finally, like, 'cause I'm American, and most Americans are like, wait a minute, we have an empire. Like, wait a minute. And some are anti-imperialist, and some are pro-imperialist. There are pro-imperialist Americans. That's crazy. But they're now realizing, well, wait a minute, this is an empire. They didn't build it with the knowledge that it was going to be one, or that, I'm trying to build one. It wasn't in America's idea. It's not something that happens on purpose, Russia. If you want to go about doing it, it takes long planning, and I know you don't have time with your current population, birth rate. Current population level and birth rate, you don't have that time. So work on fixing your family, your institutions, and believe in yourself again. Like, I think that's really important. Believe in yourself. Not just say, like, for Russia. No. Like, but what does that mean? Tell me what that means. For Russia, but what do you stand for? Do you stand for the Orthodox Church? Do you stand for the Russian ethnicity? Obviously not if you're attacking Ukraine, right? Like, you want Ukraine, you want parts of Ukraine, you're going to annex parts of Ukraine. Right? Like, what do you stand for? What do you want? And build up your families, your personal accountability, some level of individualism away from the state. I know that's scary, Russia. Like, all your history has mostly been centralized states, state authority. But, like, some level of individual, let your people breathe a bit. Just a bit. It doesn't have to be intense. I know you have a long strain of that, but and the zeitgeist, right? Like, the general zeitgeist, which you can't control, but you can foster with trust and religion and family and stuff. Rebuild those and ask your question of what you stand for, and I think you'll make it into the future. I think you'll be around in like 200-300 years if you do all of those things. So, yeah. Anyway, that's my kind of like mini rant about the Russians and their current condition and situation. I'm sure I'll show you actually something. I'll show like images. I might stream like what I'm looking at on Google Maps next time, because that'll make that more interesting. But yeah, and that was that. It was Russia's current situation, where I think they're going, and what they need to do. And no, you can't build an empire. It's not that easy. Remember to keep trying, and as always, good night and good luck.